A massacre in Pakistan. At least 145 people, most of them children, are killed in a Taliban assault on an army-run school in the city of Peshawar. In London, John Kerry calls the Israeli-Palestinian status quo unsustainable after meeting with Palestinian chief negotiator Saeb Erekat, the head of a Palestinian Authority bid for statehood with the 1967 borders at the UN. The collapse of the Russian ruble. The currency drops by 22% to an historic low despite a midnight decision by the Russian Central Bank to raise the interest rates.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the news today. I'm Lucy Aharish. Monday largely came to be defined by a terror attack on Western soil and the hostage-taking in the Sydney cafe that left 2 civilians dead. Today, terror unfortunately remained in focus with a horrifying Taliban attack on an army-run school in the northwest Pakistan after gunmen broke into a school in Peshawar and opened fire. At least 145 people were killed, and officials say 132 of them were children. Those numbers are likely to change and go up. But what is clear is it's bloodiest massacre the country has seen for years, only after some 8 hours of battle where the gunmen killed. We'll look at the Taliban aiming to build an Islamic state there and the bigger picture. But before, let's take a look back.
हम पहले क्या स्कूल का काम करे तो 4th पीरियड स्टार्ट था, अचानक से फायरिंग हुई तो हमें टीचर्स ने कहा कि आप ना डरे।
तो क्लासों में बच्चे कम थे, ऊपर फर्स्ट ईयर सेकंड ईयर के पेपर थे, वो बैठे हुए थे, तो 6-7 बंदे थे, हमने देख लिया, वहाँ से भाग गए और वो
This act of terror angers and shakes all people of conscience, and we condemn it in the strongest terms possible.
Yes, and to discuss this matter with me is senior Middle East analyst Ali Waqid. Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you very much for coming. And Iranian politics analyst Meir Javed Anfar. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming. It's not such a good evening, actually, to say these 2 words. Horrible act, Ali. Let's start, gentlemen, do some order and put some order in all the mess that we're seeing, because this time it's organized, this time it was planned, and not like we saw just yesterday, let's say, an individual act.
No, it's not an individual act, of course, Lucy, but this is part of the wave of atrocities that some of these organizations are committing. It's not so different than the atrocities and crimes committed by Boko Haram in Nigeria. We saw some similar act, a little bit more reduced, committed by the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. And today, of course, the unprecedented terror attack in Pakistan, that is very surprising. And to say that is very surprising because Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban, is taking its support from the Pakistani population, and this is an unexplained attack, even though the regime and the military and the Pakistani security services are targeting the families, and it is true, the families of the militants and leaders of the Taliban. It doesn't justify such an attack, going and shooting in an indiscriminate way and targeting children. Taliban will, I think, this is a turn point in the history of Pakistani Taliban, at least in the eyes of the population. This population that in general was embracing Taliban, supporting Taliban. A bill started now between the population and between Taliban, and the fact that this was a kind of a school that was managed by the army doesn't justify it, of course.
And, just let's take it from this point, and when we are talking about that this is a turning point, how come, and we want to discuss it, how come this is a turning point? Why? Because Daesh got into the picture, because Daesh is putting a new standard to the Taliban and telling them, okay, you're not taking the focus anymore, we are here, and Taliban decided to do something to, what, get the ego back?
First of all, if I may, I would like to express my commiserations to the people of Pakistan, anybody who's watching this program. This is a terrible tragedy for humanity. Children slaughtered like this at a school, and we share in their grief. Look, in terms of the Pakistani Taliban, what's been happening, and this is also a concern for Iran, the rise of Sunni extremism in Pakistan. They've been targeting Shia in Pakistan, who are, of course, some of them follow Iranian leaders. Some of the, for example, Ayatollah Khomeini, Ayatollah Khamenei. They've been slaughtering Shia. They've been standing outside mosques and spraying with guns, with bullets, Shia worshippers. The same thing that's happening inside of Pakistan itself, unfortunately. First of all, because Taliban, the Pakistani Taliban is a terrorist movement. Second of all, unfortunately, because the Afghani Taliban, which gets its motivation and some of its support, was actually created in Pakistan itself. This is what makes it so difficult to defeat this animal. This is an experiment, a Frankenstein that the Pakistanis created called the Afghani Taliban in order to go in there and increase Pakistan's influence in Afghanistan. Is coming back home and it's haunting the Pakistani, especially Secret Service, which created it, and to the people of Pakistan. Whether this is going to be a turning point, to be absolutely honest with you, Lucy, may or may not be. We don't know yet, because unfortunately there are so many
structures. Turning point in the attitude and the eyes of the Pakistani population vis-a-vis Taliban.
I want to hear right now. We will continue this. It's just I want to join this conversation with us right now from Lahore, Pakistan, is Rashad Rahman, editor of the Pakistan Daily News. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Rahman, do you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you barely.
Okay, so let's try to understand. Can you just tell us what is the latest update that you can give us right now about the current situation?
Okay, the update is that there were 4 buildings in the compound of this school-cum-college run by the army. 3 were cleared earlier. The last one held out with hostages, but it has now been cleared. The army is reporting they've killed 7 terrorists in all. And of course, the death toll is now up to 141, with hundreds injured, and that means it may go up.
So, we've been hearing here from Ali and from Mayor some analysis about the situation, and how come this is happening when the Afghani Taliban is getting, when the Pakistani Taliban is getting their support from the people. So how come this happens? Why does it happen? Is it an only revenge with the military that they're trying to hurt, or is it something bigger?
I think that's part of it, that they're sending a message to the military. The Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, which is our Pakistani Taliban organization, has accepted responsibility and added that now you know how it feels when you bomb our children. So clearly it's a message not only to the military, but to Pakistan as a whole. The reason it's happening is because when this military nation started in North Waziristan, it was widely anticipated that there would be a riposte, and it would be in the cities, and it would be in the form of terrorism. Unfortunately, I do not think we have prepared for that adequately, and therefore this has happened. It's a tough job because you can't guard everything all over the country at the same time. What it needs is preemptive intelligence work and police work to prevent such attacks rather than try and react to them later. Because once these guys are launched, it's very difficult to stop.
Yes, Mr. Rashad Rahman, thank you very much for this. Shai Ben-Ari has more in the next report.
At least 145 dead, officials saying 132 of them children, the deadliest ever attack on Pakistani soil by the Taliban. A group of Taliban gunmen entered a military-run school in Peshawar and began spraying bullets at those inside, most of them underage school pupils. Pakistani forces streamed to the location and began an operation to flush out the gunmen, who numbered, according to different reports, 6 or 9.
We were doing schoolwork when suddenly we heard firing, and the teacher told us not to be afraid and that maybe it was just a school drill. Then we saw the army coming into the school, and suddenly an army officer came and told us that we must all leave through the school's back door.
It soon became clear that this was no hostage crisis.
The 9th and 10th grade students were not among us because they were in the auditorium, and the students of the 1st and 2nd year were having their exams. The men entered into the rooms one by one and started indiscriminately firing at the staff members and students.
It took more than 8 hours before military sources announced all of the attackers dead. Scores of parents had already begun a frantic search for survivors at local hospitals. The Pakistani Taliban did not hesitate to take responsibility for the attack, with a spokesman stating that the school had been targeted as a result of Pakistani military operations. A recent offensive in North Waziristan had led to many casualties among Taliban forces. While the military has made forceful statements this year against the Taliban and its allies, the political leadership in the country has been less vocal, since Islamist elements make up a considerable portion of Pakistan's electorate.
Our prayers go to the families whose children were killed in this tragedy. May God bless all those families. I think this war and struggle will continue until the terrorism is completely rooted out of this country.
Some think this latest incident could be a turning point in the Pakistani government's policy towards those who now, more than ever, are revealing themselves to be enemies from within.
You know, we're watching the pictures and we're seeing the images coming from there, and it's of course it's horrible. But you know, if something like that happened in the West, if something like that happened in Europe, it would have shocked the world. It would have, let's say, made earthquakes. It seems that it's going to be in the headlines today, and tomorrow it's just going to pass because it's another act of terror in Pakistan. It's another act of terror by Boko Haram. It's another act of terror by Taliban. But yet, it feels a little bit different. It feels a little bit different than any other time.
Pakistan is a special case here. We have to remember it's a country of 200 million people. A quarter of its population, 50 million, is children between the age of 5 to 16. Out of the 50 million, only 25 million go to school. 25 million school children don't go to school. Now, out of the 25 million who go to school, these figures are from the New York Times. They did a test. The level of the mother tongue, Urdu, that's taught to 10-year-olds is what should be taught to a 6-year-old. 50% of schools in Pakistan don't have adequate electricity. This is what happens, and you put on top of all this, the Waziristan province where this happened is one of the poorest, most destitute areas of Pakistan. So you can imagine there's even less investment there. In that part of the world, Lucy, if you're poor, you either join the religious or you die. There is no state. There is no, the secular Pakistani state to come and save them doesn't exist, which is why the Taliban have actually gotten some of the support. And that's not, by the way, that's not the only part of the world where that happens. In Pakistan, unfortunately, is some call it a failed state with nuclear weapons. Pakistani state has failed time and again because of endemic corruption to reach out to the people. And unfortunately, we see some of these organizations such as Tehreek-e-Taliban coming and taking advantage. And I'm worried that this is actually going to increase. I think the rage of today is not going to be enough, because as long as the situation in Waziristan continues, also just one other point, if I can add, Waziristan, the topography, it's very mountainous. I mean, it's extremely difficult to root out the terrorists there, as much as they need to be hit at and very hard. So this is a very, very difficult situation. Of course, the terrorists are the biggest responsible party here, but the Pakistani state has really failed to create a state all around the country, and this gives the terrorists a chance.
Lucy, for a long time, the Pakistani security services and even the Pakistani army played a double game. On one hand, fighting terror, on the other hand, supporting Taliban, and even the EU's, the international community, the NATO, accuses the Pakistani intelligence of playing this double game and of giving even shelter. Some of them were accused, the security services in Pakistan, of giving shelter to Osama bin Laden, not less than this. But after the elections of Nawaz Sharif, it was very clear that this new Pakistani prime minister will try, or was elected in order to put an end to this double game. And some parts of the establishment did not appreciate this attitude, this new policy of Nawaz Sharif. And we saw in the last month unprecedented operations by the army led against Taliban. And this is why Taliban was a little bit out of equilibrium. And we saw even when the discussion with inside Taliban regarding, you mentioned Daesh and the Islamic State, the support of the Islamic State, you know, that there was a division with inside Taliban for taking the support and the loyalty from Mullah Omar, the leader of Taliban Afghanistan, to Abu Bakr and the al-Baghdadi and the Islamic State. So I think that the fact that the government is leading very firm operations against Taliban, maybe for the first time since many years, and the fact that there is this trend of the Islamic State and the intern divisions inside Taliban push some elements or some parts or some trends in the Pakistani Taliban to go against the population that support them, the population that, as Mayor said, give them the fighters and the militants and go and slaughter them.
Where does it put the United States in this case? Because we are seeing a lot of, we talked about it just outside, it seems a lot of good words, a lot of nice words. We stand by you, we stand next to you, we are here for you. But no one is really helping. It seems that the big brother, either it's the United States or the Europeans, just like, you know, sitting and saying, oh, okay, too bad that it's happened. We're condemning this. But okay, that's it. C'est la vie.
The United States, on the one hand, cooperates with the Pakistani government, and on the other hand, sends UAVs inside Pakistani airspace and kills militants. And it's a dual strategy that the United States has had, and it's not what it's worked in terms of perhaps reducing some of the attacks launched from Pakistani territory into Afghanistan. But Lucy, I mean, if you thought Iraq was hard, Pakistan is 10 times harder than Iraq. It's the levels of, I mean, in terms of a failed state, I mean, in terms of the difficulty and the topography, I mean, Iraq is mostly flat. Pakistan is mountainous. In order to win that kind of war, and also much bigger population, 200 million people. And also there's another major problem with Pakistan, unfortunately, the infrastructure, is that it's a country of 200 million, but there's sometimes in the capital, Islamabad or Karachi, the power goes out 10 hours a day. That means the economy can't grow. This is why they needed Iranian gas, and of course the deal fell through due to the sanctions. Look, there's an example I'm going to use. This is kind of it's not a perfect example. But you know how we talk about in Iran the Revolutionary Guard are the ones who set the stage and they're the ones who decide, and the politicians have to listen to them. It's, I think, a little bit similar in Pakistan in terms of especially the SIS, the Pakistani it's a Pakistani spy agency. I mean, they have incredible power. Many politicians have tried to curb it, and they have failed. And Nawaz Sharif, don't forget, Nawaz Sharif was toppled from power in 1999. He was in the air. He got a phone call from Parvez Musharraf, who was the head of the army, said, by the time you land, you will no longer be the prime minister of Pakistan. That's in a democratic country. He had to leave Pakistan. He had to live in Saudi Arabia. He's back now. How much power does Nawaz Sharif really have? Nothing will happen until the spy agency and the army decide together that the Tehrik-e-Taliban is going to be defeated.
So the picture that you're painting here is almost impossible for a prime minister to control. It's almost impossible for a president. It's almost maybe impossible for an army to control the situation right now in Pakistan.
It's a fight for the privileges and the advantages of the security services and the military. And the fight against Taliban is the raison d'etre of this establishment to continue keeping its advantages against the population, the very poor population. And Lucy, when we talk about Pakistan, we talk about a huge nation, but a very failed and poor one. And I don't see the United States, I don't see the international community even imagining to intervene in Pakistan, because Pakistan, as Mayor said, the war in Iraq will be a nice trip. Even the war in Afghanistan. Lucy, when we talk about Pakistan, May mentioned that 50% of the kids don't go to schools, and many of them that go to school go to the madrasa, the famous madrasas, the famous school, and these are Islamic school. And we're not against Islamic school, but they are teaching Islam in a very precise way that after finishing the curriculum, you are a terrorist by potential. After just finishing the curriculum, without inciting, without teaching you to hate this and that, just follow the curriculum. A very precise curriculum financed by the radical wing of the Wahhabism in the...
So let's take this to this point, because what we're seeing here and what we're seeing here, the fight, and we're talking about this since a long time, the fight and the division inside the Islam religious. This and what happened in Australia and what happened in Canada and what is happening in the Middle East and what is happening, each and every one of these acts of terror is putting a big stain on Islam. We will continue talking about this in the rest of the news today, but it's putting a big stain on a big religion that needs to find some kind of a solution to get out of the, let's say, the big mess that it got into.
You know, the war of civilization was not created by Muslim intellectuals or authors. There is an idea among the Muslim youth in the world that there is a war against Islam. Now, the difference is how to face this war, whether to face it by following the modernization and be part of the modernized world and follow democratic measures, or following it or facing it like the Islamic State want or Taliban today. There is a huge division, and I think that this slaughtery that happened today in Afghanistan will encourage more and more groups in the Muslim society. I'm not sure in Pakistan, by the way, but in the Muslim society in general, to attack the nature of this radical Islam, of this political Islam. Now, when you mention politics and Islam, when
demonstration in Germany and demonstrations in other countries that are going against Islam and going against Muslims, which is becoming it starts sounding really, really
this is why, and here in Israel and in some parts of the West, the United States were criticized for trying to encourage the Muslim Brotherhood. On the scale of the political Islam, the Muslim Brotherhood, in comparison to Taliban and in comparison to Al-Qaeda, seem to be very liberal, very moderate, very tolerant. And Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, the big ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood, said that the Muslims in the West should be the ambassadors of Islam in the West in order to create tolerance in the Western communities vis-a-vis Islam, and not to create this antagonism that we've been seeing their reflection and their expression in those rallies that you mentioned.
You know what? I have to take issue here on one issue regarding Islam being first of all, the guy who did this in Australia, he was a nut job. I mean, he could have belonged to another religion. He had psychological problems in Iran before he moved to Australia. Unfortunately, because in many of the Muslim countries, there's similar poverty in Africa and other countries, but unfortunately, some of the countries, I heard a figure that in Yemen and in Pakistan, there are more guns than people. If you had the same in some of the non-Muslim countries in Africa, the amount of weapons that are being awash, by the way, there's a lot of violence in non-Muslim countries. I think this goes back. I think this goes back to the fact that unfortunately many countries in our part of the world have failed to create functioning states for the poor people. Let's not forget that the Nobel Peace Prize has just been given to a Pakistani girl, Malala, who got shot in the head for going to school. And the majority of the people who don't go to school in Pakistan are actually women. And because when there's a failed state, people go to religion. People rely on religion. And what happens here is that, unfortunately, there are many schools, unfortunately, that teach the Wahhabi extremist version of Wahhabism in Pakistan. I'm telling you, if there's peace everywhere else, Pakistan is probably going to be one of the last countries that we're going to see. Because the failed state over there, it's not just, unfortunately, it's not just the religious discrimination. Overwhelming number of government jobs are given to people from Punjab, the Punjab province of Pakistan. The Punjabis have priority and have the better jobs rather than people from Sindh in Pakistan, or the Baluchis who live near Iran, who are the poorest of the poor. And these countries, until there's a state, until they can actually have a functioning state, they could have been any religion. They could, until we have a state in that part of the world, in Pakistan, we're going to see such extremism.
But you know what is very worried with what you're saying, that there is this new state, that the Islamic State, that they're trying to create and build for all these poor people, and try to bring them and tell them, we are going to fight for you the right fight, and we are going to do this for you. And this is going exactly to where you're saying, to the extremism, to go and take these young people to fight for this so-called new country.
Well, the thing
when
is,
it's at the end of the day terror group.
It is a terror group, but you know, how can anybody in the Islamic world, how can one person or one small group come and tell 1 billion Muslims from 50 billion countries what is true Islam? This is, I mean, even in, you know, it's extremely difficult in terms of stopping these people. And of course, Lucy, the Islamic State, you know what really terrifies me about Islamic State, apart from the brutality, that there are people, Muslims living in Holland, living in one of the most liberal countries where they enjoy the freedom of speech, freedom, and they leave their lives in order to go and fight for the Islamic State. Something is seriously wrong here. And this is a problem that we're going to have to live with as the world becomes poorer and as we fight more and more for scarce resources, and as the price of oil drops, because that's going to create even more people.
And the price of oil dropping, it will emphasize the crisis of the Islamic State, and there is a need for more attacks of this kind in order to still attract youngsters all around the world, mainly in the Islamic world. But Lucy, I want to react to what Mayor said about the young Muslims in Holland. You know, even liberal Muslims think that the Islamic State created a new equation in trying to change the reality of the Middle East, of the Arab world, that was imposed by the British and by the French. The even intellectual, liberal, secular Arabs and Muslims think that the Islamic State, with all its atrocities, is trying to change the map, the geography of the geopolicy of the Middle East that was created by the British and French. So this is why this war need very clear strategy. We've been talking about strategy, new strategy of the Americans. I'm not seeing a strategy in order to discuss whether it's new or better or worse.
Well, maybe new strategy from the Arab world and new strategy from the Islamic world could help also in this case. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. Thank you very much for coming. And we're going out for a small break, 2 minutes, and then we will be back with the rest of the news today. Don't go anywhere. A massacre in Pakistan. At least 145 people, most of them children, are killed in a Taliban assault on an army-run school in the city of Peshawar. In London, John Kerry calls the Israeli-Palestinian status quo unsustainable after meeting with Palestinian chief negotiator Saeb Erekat, head of a Palestinian Authority bid for statehood with the 1967 borders at the UN. The collapse of the Russian ruble, the currency drops by 22% to a historic low despite a midnight decision by the Russian central bank to raise the interest rate. Welcome back to the news today, and we're continuing. A high-stake meeting was underway today in London between John Kerry and chief of the Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat, with Kerry aiming to delay a Palestinian resolution to return to the 1967 borders. Before we look into that, we go to the West Bank, where IDF forces shot and killed a Palestinian this morning and lightly wounded another during a violent confrontation in the Kalandia refugee camp. According to the IDF, forces entered refugee refugee camp to make an arrest, and the soldiers encountered dozens of Palestinians who threw improvised explosive devices. The IDF says the man killed, Mohammed Adwan, threw an IED at the soldiers. Witnesses claim he was watching from the roof of his home when he was shot. And right now with us live from the Kalandia checkpoint in the West Bank is Eli Ochenberg. Good evening, Eli. So, Eli, we can see that both the diplomatic arena and on the ground things are not so calm.
Absolutely, Lucy. Well, unfortunately, we're used to the fact that in these sorts of cases, we have the Israeli version, the Palestinian version, and the similarities between the two, how will I say it gently, are very complex, and it's no difference in the diplomatic front as well. It's a very good time for the Palestinian international campaign for statehood. Tomorrow, the European Parliament is due to vote on recognizing a Palestinian state after many European governments and parliaments did so recently, and there's the entire UN bid issue. Now, it's still uncertain whether the Palestinian Authority will indeed submit such a bid Wednesday, but again, the general atmosphere, the momentum is in favor of the Palestinians. Now, let me remind you, Lucy, that there are two different proposals concerning the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There's the Arab League one, the one that the Palestinian Authority is willing to submit tomorrow, that is saying that Israel must withdraw from Palestinian territories within 2 years. And there's the French version promoted by French Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius. It's the more subtle version, saying that setting a time frame for Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, but not forcing Israel to withdraw. And the current debate is whether to go with the more subtle version at the moment.
Yes, Ali. So we heard about the Palestinians, and we heard, of course, about the Israelis. So Israelis are not that satisfied. But John Kerry met today in London with the Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat and the representatives from the Arab League. What do we know about those meetings?
Well, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry had a very hectic week. He's engaged in this conflict for years now, and he had several meetings with officials, including Saeb Erekat, as you mentioned. And basically, Kerry asked the Palestinians to halt their UN bid. As for now, as said, it's still uncertain whether they will pursue with it or not. But for further information about Kerry's meetings today in the next report, Lucy.
It's the day before D-Day. For the Palestinians, it's a highly important day. For Israel, it looks like turning out to be what Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman has called Black Wednesday. The next 24 hours will be crucial for the years-long Middle East conflict and could even change its parameters. The European Parliament is due to vote on recognizing a Palestinian state, while at the UN Security Council, the Palestinian Authority is set to table a bid to force Israel to withdraw from Palestinian land. In the past couple of days, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry traveled across Europe meeting his opposite numbers in an attempt to get a better understanding of the PA efforts and the position of European countries as well as the Arab League and, of course, Israel.
The status quo is unsustainable for both parties and for the region. And that is why it is imperative to lower the temperature and the tension so that we have an opportunity to find a path.
Traditionally, the U.S. has used its power of veto at the UN Security Council to shoot down what it sees as moves against Israel. But in a press conference Kerry held in London Tuesday, he refrained from saying outright whether this would happen this time.
I want to be very clear. This isn't the time to detail private conversations or speculate on a UN Security Council resolution that hasn't even been tabled, no matter what pronouncements are made publicly about it.
In the meantime, Israel has been making intense efforts to stave off the diplomatic moves, or at least to minimize their impact.
In a reality in which Islamic terror is reaching every corner in the globe, we will rebuff any attempt that would bring this terror into our home, into the state of Israel.
As for now, it's still uncertain whether the Security Council bid will indeed be submitted Wednesday, but the PA's determination and the international momentum are very visible and likely to continue to make progress.
Valerie Amos, the UN Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, made a scathing account to the Security Council today, blaming the international community for becoming numb to the worsening brutality in the Syrian civil war. And indeed, on the ground, there are no signs of letting up. Only in the last 2 days, 180 people were killed in a battle in Idlib. I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira has more.
Fighting in Syria is becoming even more complex. Earlier this week, around 100 Syrian soldiers and 80 Islamic fighters were killed during a 2-day battle in which different groups of extremists, including the Al-Qaeda-linked organization the Al-Nusra Front and the Salafi group Junt al-Aqsa, took over the Wadi al-Def military base in Idlib area. After conquering the strategic point, the Al-Nusra Front is now in possession of around 70% of the northwestern region of Idlib. However, the situation in other areas is quite different. In the northern area of Kobani, the main fighting is between the Islamic State militant group and the Kurds. The situation in the southern regions is even more complicated, as the Al-Nusra Front joined forces with members of the Syrian opposition, which is backed by the US-led coalition, the same factions fighting Al-Nusra in the north to defeat the government forces led by President Bashar al-Assad. Ever since the coalition led by the US and Western countries launched its operation to eliminate the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq, the expansion of the Islamic jihadist group has been blunted. US President Barack Obama addressed this issue during his visit to a military base Tuesday.
Along with our coalition partners, we are hammering these terrorists, taking out their fighters, their commanders, hundreds of vehicles and tanks, nearly 200 oil and gas facilities.
With so many factions, battles, and a humanitarian crisis that worsens every day, Syrians have only a complicated, far from happy new year to look forward to.
It's another bad year for the children of Syria. The dramatic end of the Sydney cafe siege left Australian residents in shock. The bustling city, Australia's iconic beating heart, came to a halt as they now begin to grasp and digest the situation. I-24 News correspondent Shachal Peled brings the voices of concern from the Australian streets.
Sydney's hostage incident abruptly shattered the usual tranquility of the Australian nation. After 16 hours of terror, Australians woke up to learn 2 hostages were killed and 4 wounded in the coffee house siege.
It's absolutely devastating that could happen, and that just anyone going about their business, going to get a coffee in the morning, and to have something so tragic and horrible happen to them and the families and extended families is just horrific.
The cafe manager, aged 34, and a 38-year-old mother and lawyer were killed, as was the attacker, identified as Manharon Moniz, an Iranian refugee and self-styled sheikh. 4 people were wounded, including 2 pregnant women and a policeman hit in the face with shotgun pellets. Throughout the day, people came to the scene of the siege, many in disbelief at what happened, and placed flowers.
I think everyone's just in shock and just trying to come to grips with it and try to understand, but it's just too difficult to understand.
The police launched an investigation looking into the motives of the 50-year-old lone gunman and checking whether the 2 hostages were killed by the attacker or died in the crossfire. In fear that anti-Muslim sentiments are growing across the world, Muslim leaders are urging calm. The Australian National Imams Council condemned the criminal act unequivocally in a joint statement with the Grand Mufti of Australia. A Muslim well-wisher came to show her solidarity.
We're here to show our support, not to make a statement. Want to show them that all Muslims are for Australia, and we're here to support that.
Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott also visited the improvised flower memorial, stating the government would examine why Moniz had been on bail and not on the country's terror watch list, as flags flew at half-mast across a country now facing the aftermath of an unprecedented act of terror on its soil.
And now to economy. A dramatic shift in Russia's economy on Tuesday as the Russian central bank raised its key interest rate to 17% from 10.5% in an emergency move to counter the collapse of the ruble. To understand why it's the ruble, to understand why it's all happening, with me is financial analyst Lionel Friedfeld. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening, Lucy.
So it's not that we didn't see any signs for this for the collapse of the ruble, but how come it just happened now?
Mainly, you have two key factors. The first one is that 50% of revenues from the Russian state is coming from oil. Okay. The second factor is that 2/3 of Russian exportation is based on oil. So the oil factor is great. The barrel comes from $120 to $60. This explains a lot. The second explanation is basically the international pressure and following the conflict with Ukraine and the sanction against Russia.
Yeah, so we need to understand something, because this is not only affecting Russia right now, this is also affecting Iran, because Russia made a lot of deals in the region.
It's basically affecting international markets, but to come back on Russia, the ruble, went down 50% since the beginning of the year. Today, you've got approximately 80 ruble for a dollar, 100 ruble for a euro, which is really great in that sense. And the central bank, as you mentioned, they raised at the beginning of the year, interest rates were 5.5%, and they raised, as you mentioned, to 17% today. They're pouring billions of dollars, to support the ruble, the central bank, and also President of Russia saying that he wants all the tax increase to be frozen for 4 years because they want to cut down this fall of the ruble.
So who is the one to blame? Is it really the United States the one to blame for this?
I mean, it's very difficult, question to answer. It's international market. You've got the OPEC. You've got different players. Basically, one clear answer to that is Russian economy wasn't enough diversified. It was based on 50% on oil. Today, the central bank mentioned that if the barrel will stay at 60%, it will have the GDP of Russia went down by 5%. And basically, the Russian economy shows that it's not very strong.
What is the president of Russia going to do right now? What is Vladimir Putin is going to do right now?
I think they're going to fight back to try to push OPEC members and to increase the price of international market on the oil also. But it also gives, the President Putin an idea that an economy cannot base only on oil. If 50% of the state is based on oil, it's not enough diversified.
Even I studied this and learned this from you. How come he didn't understand this yet? Lionel Friedfeld, thank you very much for this. The manhunt for the killer of 6 innocent people in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania rolls on. The prime suspect is their family member and former U.S. Marine Bradley William Stone. I-24 News reporter Shai Ben-Ari has the details.
The search continues in Pennsylvania for the gunman who went on a deadly shooting rampage which has claimed 6 lives. Bradley William Stone, a 35-year-old ex-Marine, is the prime suspect in the murder of his ex-wife and 5 of her family members during a brutal murder spree which took place at 3 different locations across Montgomery County, north of Philadelphia.
We do not know where he is. We do not have vehicle information.
Stone remains at large, but a resident of nearby Doylestown was confronted Monday evening by a man with a knife matching the suspect's description. The attacker was wearing camouflage clothing and demanded the victim's car keys. The local resident resisted and even fired several shots at the suspect with his gun. The man matching Stone's description was last seen running into the woods. Tuesday morning, several local schools remained closed while others were on lockdown. Residents of Montgomery and Buck counties were asked to stay indoors. The rampage began at this home, where Stone's former sister-in-law, her husband, and their 14-year-old daughter were shot dead. Later, the shooter continued to another house.
Upon arrival, law enforcement found 2 deceased at that residence. The 2 women who were found in that residence were the former mother-in-law and the former grandmother-in-law of Mr. Stone.
The final crime scene in Lower Salford was where Stone's ex-wife Nicole was murdered. Bradley William Stone served in the U.S. Marines from 2002 to 2011. He had 1 tour of duty in Iraq, leaving with the rank of sergeant. This latest case may serve to once again raise questions concerning the heavy psychological toll of overseas military service.
Yes, and we're back to Israel. Police raided residence of several members of Lehava, a right-wing anti-Arab organization, early on Tuesday, and arrested, among others, the group's chairman, Benzi Gopstein. More in the following report from Mael Ben-Uriel and Ori Shapira.
Tuesday morning, Israeli police led a vast operation against the Lehava anti-assimilation group. Benzi Gopstein, chairman of the far-right extremist group, was arrested on allegation of incitement of violence and terror following several nationalist and racist statements. After 10 months of investigation, police arrested the head of the group and 9 other militants. They were later put under house arrest. Last week, 3 members of the group were arrested on charges of setting fire to a bilingual Jewish-Arab school in Jerusalem in November and vandalizing this symbol of coexistence. Lehava follows the radical teaching of the Jewish Defense League, founded by Rabbi Meir Kahana. His Kach party was banned by Israel in the 1980s for inciting racism and hatred. Kahana himself was assassinated in New York in 1990. Gopstein himself sparked controversy in the Israeli media when he scathingly came out against the Arab population.
So what you are saying here is that I'm not supposed to be here at all?
No, you're not supposed to be here.
In August, members of Lehava garnered media attention by disrupting the wedding of a Muslim man with a Jewish woman who converted to Islam. The Israeli organization often makes headlines around the world as it pushes to prevent weddings between Jews and non-Jews. Its racist agenda was denounced by Israeli President Reuven Rivlin, who said they are undermined the foundation of the coexistence in the Jewish and democratic state of Israel.
I don't want to say anything about this, but let's read a book. Don't smile. With me now is I-24 News correspondent and author Ayman Sixli. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy. It's very hard to respond to that properly.
Yes, just let's smile
and
about
move on
this.
to something maybe that put a smile on your face.
We're not upset about. I'm not saying anything. Let's talk about the book.
Bush, a very special book this week, Lucy. So we have George W. Bush, the former president of the United States, writing an expansive life review of his father, also a president of the United States. So it's a saga of the Bush era, or the 2 Bush eras, should we say.
He, in one way or another, he is actually making his father. Giving his father some glorification?
Absolutely. He's glorifying his father in this. And it's a special, we've seen many books about former presidents, but this time it's a president writing about a president and their father and son. So truly a special occasion here.
What are the differences that we can see between the father and the son
in
the book?
Well,
because in reality we saw it, but in the book.
Well, in reality, of course, they continued each other's wars in Iraq and created a big mess. But in the book, what's really interesting is, Bush Sr. was also the director of the CIA. And the CIA has been, of course, in the headlines again lately with the CIA torture report coming out. And really, it's a sign of the times that you see in this book. Whereas the CIA used to be surrounded by heroism. It used to be a big deal to be a CIA operative. And it was immune to criticism at that time. This time around, when this book is published, the CIA is under heavy public scrutiny. People are looking at the CIA vastly differently, and at the presidency vastly differently as well.
So if we're looking, it's very... I'm trying to imagine George W. Bush writing this book, and and he is saying that he learned a lot from his father. What is he mentioning about this? What did he learn from his father?
Well, I think most of all, he learned how to cover up his mistakes a little better. I'm not saying it worked, because, of course, after 9/11, he initiated the Patriot Act, which was supposed to reveal conspiracies against the U.S., but as we know, Edward Snowden blew the whistle on this story. The U.S. Citizens found out that a lot of information was gathered on them, and public outrage ensued. So really what you see here is how presidencies now are supposed to be more careful than before.
Would you like that your son will write a book on you?
I really wouldn't, but I think this Bush saga isn't over. Jeb Bush is running for president next time around, so maybe we'll see a new book in a few years.
Okay. You will read it and you will tell me what happened there, how it's ending. Ayman Sikzik, thank you very much for
Thank
this.
you, Lucy.
What makes Berlin a ground to promote peace? Local initiatives have grown in the past year to bring Israelis and Palestinians together from afar. I-24 News correspondent Jaffa Port has more on the German peace initiatives.
Is there really a recipe for peace? Siska Janssen and her cooking initiative are still trying to figure it out. Siska, a half Dutch, half Indonesian living in Germany, is trying to bring Israelis and Palestinians closer together.
Cooking brings people together. It also eating together, also with other people, inviting other people to learn what the Middle East cooking is all about.
The Cooking for Peace initiative aims to connect Israelis, Palestinians and other nationalities by focusing on similarities like food rather than political differences.
I don't believe a lot in politicians anymore. The only people who can make a difference are the normal people like you and me, who are cooking together, who are eating together.
Inspired by the despair on both sides, Siska and her volunteers from Turkey and Pakistan to Hungary and Venezuela work together on benefits. All donations go to the Parent Circle, some 600 bereaved Israeli and Palestinian families who lost loved ones as a result of the Middle East conflict.
They're just people from, your neighbors who lost somebody and who just want to have peace in their lives.
Arts and culture thrive in Berlin, but also a mindset of coexistence and dialogue. Here in the neighborhood of Neukölln, which is where a rabbi once proclaimed was a no-go area for Israelis and Jews because of the high population of Muslims, a joint effort was established.
At the beginning we were 4 people of Jewish and Arabic backgrounds, and now we have almost 100 people who work at the group in different ways of all various cultural and religious backgrounds.
Armin Langer's Salam Shalom initiative, celebrating its 1-year anniversary, tries to address issues of both conflict and coexistence. Ido from Israel and Laila, who has Palestinian roots, both take part in the project.
In Germany, sometimes you can see the similarity between the Jews and the Arabs more than you can see it in Israel. There's really a systematic separation and differentiation of the two communities.
You never interact with the other person, so you will always see him as the other and not as a person like yourself, having the same wishes, the same thoughts and feelings.
Intentionally focusing on the so-called other, they believe starting a dialogue between people in Germany of all places is the right way, if not the solution itself.
We try to make a good society here and a good connection here in Berlin.
I think it's also really important if you start talking together, not to do it on the political issues at first, because you always have a different opinion. No matter how close you are, you always have a different opinion. So you have to start off at another level.
And to those who call it naive or euphoric, Armin has an answer.
These conflicts don't exist in Berlin. We build the bridges instead of the walls.
I wonder what will happen if we will all move to Berlin. Now to sports. The editor just told me that we're moving. I'm packing. With me is the host of the Sports Magazine, Jonathan Regev. Good evening.
Evening, Lucy.
You missed me, right?
Of course, but of course.
Of course, because Shai, the editor, didn't.
That's his problem.
It's a problem. So I really, really missed you, and I really want to talk football with you. So let's do it.
Yes, someone who is moving, not to Berlin, but back to London. Thierry Henry is retiring from the world of football. His best years were in Arsenal. And now the last few years he played in the New York Red Bulls in the MLS in the United States. Now he's back to London. He will join Sky Sports. Thierry Henry, one of the greatest players France ever had, part of the 1998 World Cup winning team, the 2000 Euro winning team, and an exceptional player. Everywhere he played, he was beloved, whether it's in Monaco or in Arsenal, the French national team, and the Red Bulls where he played. And he's 37, he could still play. And there were rumors he'd be back maybe to PSG, maybe back to Monaco, maybe even the Indian Super League. But you know, I admire the players that can say, I'm at my peak, I will go now. I don't want to deteriorate. This is the time to go.
I admire the professions that you can retire at the age of 37. And I'm not that far from that age.
No comment, I'm past that. I'm old, what can I do? I'm oldie.
Okay, Serena Williams.
Serena Williams, we're used to seeing her playing tennis, but now she's running, and for a good cause, for the Serena Williams Fund. She was running in Miami, Florida, to raise money for education and for families affected by gun violence. This is her sister Venus, who also participated, running 5 kilometers for these two, we should say, not very difficult, yet the initiative is beautiful. That's what they do in their spare time. The tennis season is out now. They do running for charity, good cause, and we applaud that, absolutely.
Okay, 5 kilometers. It's a lot for me. Yeah.
Not for Serena Williams. I know you expect me to bring the big physical sports people now. You do. That's beautiful, but I'm not going to bring them because we're going to speak about the World Bizarre Mind Games.
Oh, okay.
That is what we have now. That is happening in China.
Okay.
And that's speed chess. That's the beginning. Speed chess. And there's also the Paris Bridge. Now, in the Paris Bridge, there's an Israeli success because the brothers Ophir and Ilan Herbst, they won the gold medal in the Paris Bridge. I hope I'm saying this right. I'm not a big expert on bridge, I admit. They were down against the pair from Monaco, but then they won.
I'm still
Speed chess, yes.
Speed chess.
Speed chess. Tack, tack, tack. Fast. No time to think.
So tack, tack, tack. We're finishing.
Move it now.
We're finishing. Jonathan Regev, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tack, tack, tack. 2 minutes, and we will be back. Just like that.